Alright, the first thing we want to do is attach our zipper. It just makes it easier to attach the zipper first before you sew the skirt sides together. You can see the zipper I've shortened. I've sewn over the coil and then cut off the rest. My zipper was just too long and the color matched it well. So if you do ever have a zipper but it's a little bit too long as it's not a metal zipper, you can actually machine sew carefully over the nylon coil. It'll be soft and give way, and then you can cut off just a little bit, a centimeter and a half below your new stop. So that means now my sewing stops the zipper from opening too far. Just remember not to cut it before you sew it, because otherwise you'll just end up taking the zipper head off and it's almost impossible to get the pull back on. Okay, so looking at this is the back of my skirt. The right sides are facing up, so you can see my darts here. The curvy bits are your side and the straight bits are your center. You want to go and mark the length of your zipper. So if I lay it onto the top, I know my zipper up to its stop is about this long. So using your tailor's chalk or a pin, you can just mark that. In order to sew the zip, the first thing we want to do is sew up the seam underneath the zip with a regular stitch. So I'm folding together the right sides, making sure that all the pieces match up really well. Okay, just finding where I marked it, which is here, or pin from there. Depending on how slippery your fabric is, you might only need to put in 3 pins or so. If you've got very slippery fabric, I would recommend pinning more frequently. And if you have a regular cotton fabric, you might prefer not to pin at all. Okay. So we still have our machine set at a regular straight stitch with the normal stitch length. Starting at the top pin, you want to lower the needle just where you marked. Now remember what your seam allowance is. Each pattern might be different, so check whether your seam allowance is a centimeter, perhaps just to the edge of the presser foot here, or a centimeter and a half. There's a good chance that your pattern will have a centimeter and a half seam allowance, especially at the center back. Most commercial patterns use this seam allowance unless it's a neck seam. Okay, and again you want to go forward, back stitch to keep your stitching in place and locked, and so all the way down to the seam. Okay, back stitch at the end, and you can take out your stitching, clipping your thread on either end. After sewing our seam, before we insert the zipper, it will be easier to finish the raw edge first. We need to finish the raw edge because you can see here how, just from handling the fabric a little bit, it's already starting to fray. Of course, some fabrics fray more easily than others. If you have a knit or stretch fabric, for example, you would be fine leaving the edges raw like that, and they shouldn't really come undone. However, in a woven fabric such as this cotton, you want to make sure that you're doing something to finish the edges so it won't unravel. So we're going to use a zigzag stitch, and you might remember from our very first video how I've shown you the different seam edges. So for this one, we want to lay the fabric under here, having the edge of the fabric meet up with the edge of this window here. And we want to change our stitch over to a zigzag stitch. Okay. The stitch length stays the same, but you might want to play around with your stitch width, depending on how wide your machine goes. It might actually come up, if it's an electronic machine, with a recommended stitch width. So if you haven't done much zigzag on your machine, just double check. So this one is quite good. I'm just doing a couple by hand so I can gauge how wide my stitch is. And it finishes right on the edge, or just a tiny bit over the edge, which is exactly what I want. Okay, so once you've done that, you can back stitch just like you did before. So keep on feeding the fabric through. And as you get to your sewn part, just make sure that you move your other piece of fabric out of the way. Reverse a back stitch at the end of the seam, and you will continue to do that for the other seam as well. Clip your thread. And you can see now how I've got a zigzag going along the edge of this fabric here. You will find that there's obviously still that fraying. So what you can do is either cut off any remainders now, or wait till you've put it in the first wash. Then it'll fray just a tiny little bit more, and after you've cut that, after that one, it shouldn't be fraying at all anymore. You can use a commercial overlocker, which is a separate machine, to finish your edges, but when you're just starting out sewing, you might find that they're quite expensive, and a basic sewing machine will do the job just as well. So let's do the other side. With your edges finished, you're ready to insert your zip. For the lap zipper that we're going to do, we're going to use a different technique to the one that we have used previously, just so you can try out both and see which one suits you. We need to go back to the ironing board. So in this method, you've got your seam allowance at 1.5 centimeters, but you want to use just slightly less than 1.5 centimeters in seam allowance, because the zipper wants to sit underneath the fabric on the other side. So in a lap zipper, we can't see it. So use about 2-3 millimeters less, and steam your seam into place. If you're unsure, you can always measure and see whether you've got it right. So now that you've ironed under your seam allowance at perhaps 1.2 centimeters, you created a neat edge on the other side. Take your zipper, and with the zipper pull, so the good side of the zipper facing up, line up your zipper just with your edge of the fabric and pin it into place. As you're sewing from the top down, just keep in mind that if you're pinning with your pins facing in either direction, that you want to be able to pull the pin head out towards you. And you can see I'm pinning it quite close to the zipper coil. So pin close, but don't pin so close that you can't open or close your zip anymore. So see how I've pinned this like that? That would prevent the zip from opening. So just before you close, before you start sewing, double check. So do check it's opening and closing all right, which it is. And then with your zip open, you can start sewing. Remember when you're sewing on zips that you need a special zipper foot to attach. On each machine, as shown in the previous video, they look different. For this machine at the moment, we have one that is open on both sides.